tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
I wanted to move on to this story which came up out of Ottawa. I have never shockingly been a Girl Guide. I know you were, it's 2023, I could have been. But Girl Guides of Canada, which has been around for, as my late British grandmother would have said, donkey's years, which just means a long time, but it's far more amusing to say it with a British accent. Girl Guides of Canada has told its chapters they are not to participate in Santa Claus parades. Yeah, Santa Claus parades. Now, you may wonder why. It's not because Santa Claus is an evil, white male patriarch, but it's because Santa Claus is associated with Christmas, which is a religious holiday, and Girl Guides of Canada believes it needs to embrace its policy of secularism in the name of diversity, inclusion, and tolerance. So, as such, a Girl Guide chapter, which wants to jump in and join the Santa Claus parade, as the chapter in Canada, near Ottawa or in Ottawa wanted to do, is unable to. So this is rather absurd. And, every year there are these stories where, people will coin the phrase or use the phrase a war on Christmas. And I find often the so-called war on Christmas gets a bit overblown. But I don't believe if a Girl Guide group wanted to, I don't know, not that they have Ramadan parades, but I don't think if a Girl Guide group wanted to march in a Ramadan parade as a show of solidarity, that they would be told they are not allowed to do so. But this is what happened here. And then you juxtapose that with this story that was broken last week by the Epoch Times, which was a fascinating and very upsetting story that military chaplains who are there for the spiritual health and well-being of members of the Canadian Armed Forces are now prohibited from doing public prayers, including at Remembrance Day ceremonies. They have to be as nondescript and non-religious as they can. Tom Marazzo is with me. He is you know him as a key volunteer and player with the Freedom Convoy and also author of the book, The People's Emergency Act. But he is also a retired captain in the Canadian Armed Forces and joins me now. Tom, good to talk to you with a bit of a different hat on today.
Yeah, thank you. This is unusual that I get to talk about something different than the convoy. So thank you.
Well, it's look, and I mean, thank you for your service, as I say to any veteran that I speak to. But this is a really, really disgusting turn of events. I mean, the reason military chaplains exist is because faith is so tremendously important to people. We have incorporated in our religious observations, in my church and every church I've ever been to, honoring veterans on Remembrance Day. And at Remembrance Day ceremonies, prayer has always been a very prominent thing. And why on earth is now the time to say this is no longer permitted? These people that are still part of the Canadian Armed Forces that have a role are no longer able to actually be spiritual leaders.
It's such a bizarre story. Excuse me. I don't know what the timing of it, other than to say that it does seem like it's something orchestrated. But I don't mean to suggest some sort of conspiracy theory or anything, but I just find it interesting. And when I saw the story broke, the first thing I thought was, you better change the first line of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is, whereas Canada is founded upon the principles that recognize the supremacy of God in the rule of law. So it begs the question, what is it that veterans are fighting for, if not for, the very way of life that we have in Canada? Why did our combat veterans go to World War I and II in Afghanistan and Korea and all these missions overseas, if not to preserve the way of life that we have here in Canada? And for many, that includes God. And it doesn't have to be the Christian God. It could be the God of whatever religion that you prescribe to. But, the timing of this I find extremely bizarre, especially coming right up, close to Remembrance Day. And it makes no sense to me, other than I would say it is just one more further erosion on, the foundations of this country that we built. And I don't mean my generation, but I mean the Judeo-Christians that settled from Europe and came and built Canada into such a great country, or what it used to be. I would argue that it's not so great anymore under the current political landscape. But it's interesting to me that, the very things that made us Canadians seem to be the very things that are being taken away from us slowly, incrementally. And to me personally, I find it really offensive. I spent a lot of my life questioning my religious beliefs. And I have had many occasions to sit down with military padres and talk about the existence of God and where I fit into the universe. In the morality of what I'm doing or what I did for 25 years of my life, and to see that somehow becoming sort of taboo amongst those celebrations that are so important to us, to honor the sacrifices of past men and women who've given up their lives, and not just the ones who've given up their lives, but who have been wounded, who have psychologically suffered as as a result of answering the call of Canada to go off to foreign lands and do things, and doing that knowing they were, one, protecting the way of life in Canada in the traditions that we have. But there is a saying that something to the effect that in war, um, everybody in a foxhole believes in God.
Hmm.
You know, and I certainly think that it is an affront to the Canadian public to put limitations or even curtail or reframe these things around Remembrance Day ceremonies. I just think it's wrong. And
Let me just
I'm not just, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to jump in just to give people the full context of what has
Mhm.
been changed here. So, the directive, and I'm reading this from the Epic Times here. Well, the dimension of prayer may occupy a significant place for some of our members. We do not all pray in the same way. For some, prayer does not play a role in their lives. Therefore, it is essential for chaplains to adopt a sensitive and inclusive approach when publicly addressing military members. It goes on to say that any spiritual reflection, not a prayer, needs to be inclusive and in nature and respectful of the religious and spiritual diversity of Canada. Because of the gender-based analysis, you cannot actually refer to God as male. If you are
Mhm.
going to reference God, you can't say Heavenly Father because that's gendered. And
Yes.
then they've also taken away, and this is, I think, really crazy. There are scarves that chaplains wear, and I didn't know this necessarily, but each scarf has an emblem on it depending on the religion of that chaplain, because they aren't all just Christians, and those
Mhm.
emblems have to go. So now, like a Christian minister, a Catholic priest that's a chaplain has to pretend that they are just this nondescript force here. So they're trying to just, like, it's weird that they're trying to do the best of both worlds, because they're trying to claim that we still have this spiritual role, but we have to strip away the thing that makes that role relevant to people. And by the way, it's Muslims and Jews that also suffer from this, because they're not allowed to have any recognition of their faith, of a chaplain of their denomination.
Yeah, I read all that as well, and I found it interesting that this report or this policy came as a report based on a 2022 committee studying diversity and inclusion within the Canadian Armed Forces. This is more wokeism. This is what it is again. This is about the true nature of supporting military members on the battlefield or military members at a Remembrance Day ceremony. This is about wokeism. And, to me, it's irrelevant what religious faith you come from. What is relevant to me is, Section 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is, you have a fundamental freedom regarding freedom of conscience and religion. Okay. And so when you look at this woke ideology, which I would say is directly attributed to Marxism, Marxism isn't very friendly to religion of any kind. This is just one more example of a Marxist takeover of another institution. It's another nail in the coffin of the Canadian military. Why would anybody want to join the Canadian military given everything that has been socially experimented on within the CAF? I mean, our priority needs to be about training for the defense of this country, not spending copious amounts of hours being trained in diversity, and denied, your Section 2, religion, freedom of your conscience. So I find the whole thing absolutely absurd. And the reason I say, why would you want to serve, is because what the hell are you fighting for? What is it that you want to sacrifice your life to defend in this country? I don't even recognize this country anymore.
There have been, I know it's separate from the chaplain discussion, but there has been this tremendous relaxing of standards in the last few years for members of the Canadian Armed Forces. And just to give one example, I was at the airport the other day, and I was walking through, and there were four young men in uniform that were, just eating at the restaurant and presumably going somewhere or coming back from somewhere. And, one of them had this like neck tattoo, which I don't love tattoos. Do what you want. And, he's still serving his country, and I have no ill will towards him. But there are certain standards that existed even a couple of years ago that don't now. And the reason they've had to do that, and I know the policy on tattoos is one of them, is because no one wants to join. There is an enrollment, or there is an enlistment issue. There is a morale issue of people that are in there. And there is a treatment issue of people that were in there. I remember a story a couple of weeks ago of like soldiers, I think it was in Latvia, that had to buy their own helmets or bulletproof vests or whatever it was because the military wasn't holding up its end of the bargain. And, it's easy to look and say that, this is all just bureaucracy and mismanagement, but it's that government is also, I fear, and this is not to sound conspiratorial, but directly or indirectly killing off the military.
Yeah. I mean, joining the military for many people, and it certainly was for me, there's this sort of inner fire that you have, that you want to join, and you want to be part of something that important within your country. You want to contribute. You want to do something positive and good and serve your country. And you want to do it at a very, very high level too. That's something that we don't often talk about. You don't want to go in there and be mediocre. You want to go in there and be exceptional. And when you look at this, and this is something many of the veterans I know right now I find very offensive, this relaxing in the standards of dress and deportment, because we believe it also contributes to a lack of personal discipline, a lack of respect for authority in wartime. I'm sorry, but it's a military. It's not necessarily a democracy. It certainly isn't on the battlefield. When you're told to jump, you jump. And, that comes from discipline, like good order and discipline. And, in terms of how you look and feel, I want to feel in my uniform like I am the biggest, baddest, force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. I don't want to be, me and having my own personal ethics, but flanked by either side with guys on the battlefield with their nails polished and earrings and long hair. I want to know that I'm there doing the work of the military to the best of my ability and with other people that feel the same. And so when I look at this drop in standard, I would say that it is directly attributable to this wokeism ideology that is completely engulfed the senior leadership of the Canadian military. And that's, Army, Navy, Air. And you're right. There's not that many people in uniform right now. We're somewhere shy of or short of about 12,000 to 16,000 positions are vacant in the Canadian Force right now. And I don't see that improving because I don't view the Canadian military as a winning team. It's just not what it used to be. It's not the military that we had in Afghanistan, that were highly sought after in terms of NATO cooperation, NATO operations. JTF2 was often selected by the Americans because they were so good. And I can't, answer for the state of them now, but that's an example. As a Canadian Special Operations teams were highly sought after to go on missions. I know Canadian soldiers were highly sought after. And I'll tell you, there's a saying from World War II, and it was I believe it was from Rommel. He said that the unstoppable army in the world, German officers, American equipment, and Canadian soldiers. You can't say that today. You cannot say that today. I'm sorry. And I'm not trying to criticize the people that are currently serving, but look at the state of the Canadian military right now. We have less people in the regular force right now, or roughly around the same size as the New York City Police Department. That's
Wow.
the state of our Canadian military. And it's only going to get worse when they start taking religion or religious freedom away from soldiers expressing that. Because what's next? A padre can't express himself, so show symbols. But what does that say for the soldier now? You're not going to be allowed to wear a cross. You're not going to be able to pray in the mess. Where does it end? This is just one step in a long line of questionable conduct by the senior leadership. And the chaplain general should know better.
Yeah, and to weave the two issues we were talking about together, you can have a face tattoo and express yourself that way, but heaven forbid there's a cross. If you've got a cross on your cheek, you can't have a face tattoo or something. Exactly. That's where things are going. Tom Marazzo, author of the fantastic book, The People's Emergency Act, which you can see just in the top, I think it's left corner. On my screen, it's the left corner.
And Andrew, I got yours too. I got yours too on the shelf. I got yours right.
I've just got the Chinese translation of mine handy. I gave my last English one away, so take from that what you will. Great. But it's a great book, and you can get that on Amazon. And you can also look at my interview with Tom when that book came out a few weeks back, which is over at tnc.news. Well, Tom Marazzo, thank you again for your service, and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.